All right, we're here today with Cerna Solutions and partnering with Perspectium for this webcast. This is extending ServiceNow workflows to partners. It is episode 3 of an ongoing kind of webcast series called Solving ServiceNow Data Challenges. So thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Cicero. I'm a practice manager at Cerna Solutions. We provide ServiceNow services across the breadth of the ServiceNow platform, but are especially known for data integrations, from ServiceNow to all of the other kind of enterprise platforms to solve various challenges. With us today, we've got Dave Wesley from Perspectium. Dave.
Thanks, Josh. Dave Wesley here. I'm a solutions consultant with Perspectium. We're focused on integrations in and out of ServiceNow, both at high volume, high velocity, and today's focus, of course, on eBonding or service bonding systems together. Thanks,
Dave. Just a quick announcement before we get started. Some of you may have seen this already. Cerna Solution is merging with Evergreen Systems and NovaScale, two other really highly respected partners in the ServiceNow space. The end result of this is going to be a new company called Thirdera. We're going to be entirely focused on ServiceNow, trying to deliver kind of bigger, better services across the entire ServiceNow platform, looking to do some of the ride the digitalization wave, right? Where there's very focused on worker experiences and kind of other really cool outcomes on the platform. Please do visit thirdera.com to join our emailing list or connect to our new social pages. As I was saying, we've had, this is the 3rd episode of the series, right? Solving ServiceNow Data Challenges. The first 2 episodes, Achieve Data Transparency and Securing ServiceNow Data Against the Unexpected, can be found on YouTube. And so thank you for joining us today with Extending ServiceNow Workflows to Partners. Quick note before we really dive into things, please do ask questions throughout. This is kind of more of a discussion on some of these topics that are interesting from an integrations perspective today. And we want to make sure that we're answering any questions people have. We'll try to do that either real time or at the end as we circle back. So feel free to post questions in the Q&A as you have them. So I guess the thing we should start with is what do we mean by extending workflows and why would we do that? And there's a number of reasons, and some of those here on the screen. But you'll hear us refer, I guess, a little bit today to the concept of eBonding, and eBonding is the electronic integration between 2 records, probably in 2 different systems that represent pieces of a process. And so as those records are moving through their life cycle and people doing their work in both places, a lot of times those, in order for the pieces of the process to communicate and become one total workflow, right, we've got to communicate data back and forth. And traditionally, that was a swivel chair activity. That was something we did via email, but there were lots of challenges introduced with that. So more and more today, you see this concept of, hey, how do we connect these things together electronically so they share the necessary data in real time and provide lots of benefits? So we'll be talking about that a little bit today in the context of a couple examples. Dave, I don't know if you want to kind of add some flavor there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Josh. So we find oftentimes when we're integrating systems together that there's several different topics and concepts that come up as to why and the requirements around those. There's several mentioned here that are incredibly important. I think one of those I like to start with is, the wasted time and or letting people work in the systems that they prefer to interact with. Context switching can sometimes cause slowdowns. You have to get your view set up on multiple systems, and inherently you then run into maybe data integrity issues as well between the systems. So that swivel chair, swivel seat approach really has a very hard ceiling on it of how quickly a person can do that work without making mistakes. So that's one area to maybe kind of start with, but great topics on the slide here we can dig into as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples where that switch of context is not just unpleasant, right? It costs all kinds of time, and you lose transparency into where things stand, right? You don't have that kind of single pane of glass. So certainly probably the one that I would focus on the most. A good call out. So we've got we want to talk about sort of 2 models of this. I think the first is this idea of inter-organizational workflows, right? So So how do I, or what are the scenarios where I, as a organization, have a system of record, in this case ServiceNow, and want to interact with, work management systems other places? And I think a couple really common examples are, you've got maybe a vendor, right, who's providing service for something, and it could be AWS, it could be somebody else who's using ServiceNow to provide service to you, maybe for a part of your network, right, or a subset. And there's scenarios where you're managing kind of your worker or your customer experiences in ServiceNow, but you've got to at some point escalate effectively outside your organization. And the legacy version of that was, well, I've got to email a switcher and submit a ticket somewhere else, but then I lose that link, that transparency for the user of, hey, where's my stuff at, right? Because statuses are disjointed, there's all kinds of challenges. So we're seeing more and more and more and more that organizations are looking to, drive integrations to make these things kind of seamless in real time. And specifically, I've seen two recently that are kind of interesting. One is, a company hired a vendor to manage their data centers, but they still provided their own end user support, right? So they had their ServiceNow instance, and they had their employees and customers that would come in the ServiceNow instance to report issues. And sometimes, though, that issue would be identified, hey, this is part of server infrastructure, and it would get escalated to this third party who's also using ServiceNow. But how do we do that? They chose to build an eBonding integration to connect those things, so that when it was assigned to a group, it would automatically get created in the vendor system, et cetera. And then another one we saw is very similar, but it was instead of data centers, it was for the VoIP network. And so you had your voice over IP phone infrastructure, and you're paying a third party to support it. Same kind of thing. You might get stuff that you support, and then stuff that's supported by them, and how do we escalate that kind of outside the system? And both of those scenarios ended up being eBonding integrations. So I don't know. I know, Dave, you've got a couple. You're seeing a ton of this as well, right? Is that a pretty, I guess, is that pattern consistent like that, or have you seen other versions?
Yeah, Josh, I think those are great examples, and we certainly do see those types of use cases. Absolutely. A couple others that we've seen that kind of dovetail into your examples would be kind of what we've solved for a couple of our customers, Zurich and Aetna, and that's connecting out to affiliates, right? So not just connecting to an MSP, but even connecting to partner companies, affiliate companies. Those do become inter-organizational.
Yep.
And so those have their kind of to your point, they have those challenges, but also to your point, we get into SLAs, we get into contractual agreements between these systems. We oftentimes run into the scenarios too, where by its nature, one company doesn't own both of these systems, or 3 or 4 or 5 systems. These are going to be owned and maintained by other systems or by other organizations. There are oftentimes contractual obligations between the two to complete the process. There are oftentimes legal or regulatory compliance issues as well that must be met. So when you get into the design of these types of relationships between systems, you also are uncovering process relationships between the companies. So do we need to have extra security? Do we need to have both in transit and at rest security? Do we need to have some type of data guarantee or reporting that shows me my integration's working and that I can prove it works, and we don't get into a finger pointing situation of it's not working, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. And then, of course, how do we, like you said, how do we want to track SLAs? How do we do reporting on this? How can I ensure my customer that I am servicing their needs to the requirement? And or how can I ensure my MSP or my provider is doing that for me? We have customers that sync out both to their MSPs, but then they also sync to their customers as well. So they're providing the service to their customer. And then, as you mentioned, they're escalating maybe specialty work to one of their MSPs.
Yeah, that's actually something we've seen a bunch is, hey, I'm paying this big contract for a vendor to support me in some capacity, and there's SLA obligations in the contract. So part of the reason I need this integration is so that I have like a digital record of, did they meet their contractual obligations or not? Because there's a huge potentially amount of money, and then quality of service obviously driven based on whether or not they're kind of meeting expectations. So that's a real good one. And then there's obviously the other example too, where, and you may have mentioned this, but maybe I'm like an enterprise service provider, like an MSP, right? And I've got a bunch of customers that are all managing some subset of the work, right, in their environment, and I now am trying to provide them service the way they're used to it in their environment, but I really don't want my agents logging in 15 places too, right? So that's the consolidation lens of it too.
Absolutely. Yep. And do I have to manage all those licenses and how people log in? What happens to onboard a new agent? What happens to
Yeah.
for an offboarding an agent? Do I have to make sure all of my customers' systems are secure? Right. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's an awful lot of workload if we don't have an automation around this. Also, you even get into, because these are disparate organizations, they may not want to give logins to the other organization. So is there a method? We have one of those at Perspectium where everything's outbound into
Yeah.
us versus inbound. Well, that tends to help sometimes, again, in highly regulated environments where you can't inbound into a firewall, you must outbound. Some of these systems may be cloud hosted, some may be a traditional on-prem, and you have to have a method to then outbound from the on-prem solution into the cloud solution, if it's a mix and match environment. We even have the ability for someone, if they're a ServiceNow customer, use an integration hub, we've got a spoke. That's a quick and easy way to maybe make a connection, again, if that meets the requirements. But yeah, to your point, knowing that it completed, having proof that it completed, having that record of it worked, and then even the failure modes. What happens if it doesn't work? How can I quickly resend it? What if it goes down at 2 a.m. local time? Did my messages eventually get there, or do I have to pick apart what failed and how it failed and resend messages?
Yeah, and all that's super critical, right? For the examples you shared around, obviously regulatory compliance, and even just making sure that we deliver the message so that the issue is going to be remediated, whatever that might be. So these are all things. Obviously there's a lot of permutations of this. The core concept's pretty simple, right? It's hey, I'm automatically sending data back and forth to keep process components in sync, right? But there's lots of reasons people, extra reasons people do this. And then there's lots of technical complexity, as you described, around doing it really, really well. And this is something that, Perspectium's doing as a service, right?
Yeah, that's correct. We are integration as a service. We're providing this focus 24/7, 365 on message flow, on making sure the messages that were sent were received and vice versa from both systems. And we have a robust queuing mechanism as well for capturing glitches, network glitch. The other system that you don't control has to go down for maintenance for 2 hours. What does that mean? It just means it keeps running. And the moment it's back up, we're all queued back up again. So yeah, these are the areas we work in specifically for our enterprise customers all over the world. And it's designed to give that robust architecture approach and that 24/7 approach. And also as these systems upgrade over time, so as the next version of ServiceNow or Jira or whatever may come online, it's our responsibility to make sure the integration still functions with the new versions. So it takes some of that ongoing development work out of the responsibility of the customer.
Awesome. It's something we've dealt with a lot, right? Where we've had to build integrations for these folks, and one of the things that Perspectium offers, right, is a kind of centralized way to manage that across a lot of scenarios going a lot of different places. Let me bring this back up.
Especially when we get into the kind of the intra organizational, as you're bringing your slides back up, is the ability to then by default, we're bi-directional. By default, we have attachments. We have, we can share the audit, we can share the journal, but also the ability that if I'm an MSP or if I'm a customer and my MSP is already using Perspectium, what's the easiest, quickest way for me to connect to them? And it could be, like I mentioned before, it could be a spoke out of the integration hub, which we have, or it could be a different type of solution where you're connecting directly. It's more than just mapping data across. It's actually the entire architecture of the process. And from the MSP's perspective or from a customer's perspective, if I have solved ServiceNow to ServiceNow once, give me a quick and easy way to do that over and over and over. And that's what we do. We have a common data model for mapping, and we make it as easy as possible in a graphical environment, no code solution, to very quickly take a template from one integration, apply it to the next, make some tweaks if you need to, and you're flowing data. It's designed to be a very fast and scalable solution once you know that you need more than one.
Yeah, very cool. And I mean, this is something we've seen kind of, I guess, for years at customers, right? And it's a problem we've solved. And it sounds like you guys have just taken that experience that you've had across, many use cases and kind of built the template or the platform on which to repeat that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Our specialty is service in and out of ServiceNow. So ServiceNow is always one element of the integration. And so that's where we spend our time. And that's where we have years and years of experience, is getting data in and out of ServiceNow, either just a one direction, bi-directional, multi-directional, 2-3 systems working together. And that's our focus. So lessons learned and implementing this for enterprises around the world, we bring that to each engagement that we have.
Awesome. And then the other scenario, so we were talking about inter-organizational, right? We're connecting to third parties, and this is going to feel really similar, but this is one we see almost more, right? Which is you've got, within your organization, you've got different teams doing different parts of things on different systems. So you could have teams that are doing stuff in, the system you're using to drive procurement supply chain. They could be could be the sales team in Salesforce. It could be maybe one of the development teams in Jira or Azure DevOps, right? And in all these scenarios, if we want to provide that kind of like enterprise experience with that single pane of glass where we can do all our centralized reporting and do all of our outcome management and customer support in one place, we've got to connect that stuff together. And that's something that I think every organization looks at and says, yeah, that would make sense, but how do I get there?
Yeah, absolutely. And the use cases technically are similar, but the processes are often quite different. So what we discussed in the previous slide around SLAs and reporting and creating multiple connections out to multiple customers, or creating connections out to your MSPs, whichever direction you're going. Those things are a bit different when we move inside the organization, because by its very nature, you as an organization now own all these systems. But that also means we get into an entirely different level of processes, right? Where you might just share a few fields with a customer and MSP, because that's all you really need to do to get that process completed. Here, oftentimes you're moving much more data, and just focusing on mapping is not necessary. That's a little bit too tight of a view. Sometimes we have to step up into a higher level and really think of the entire process. Which of these systems, for example, would be the data owner of certain data? Right.
Yep.
All the systems need to read the data, but only certain systems can update or modify the data. Some of these may flow one directional, some may flow two directional. You get into much more of data ownership and the minutia of process, because these are different teams. They want to work on their own systems. The fields don't always match. There's been customizations over time. So overall, what do I have to know from these other systems to complete my process on platform, and I'm done? And then the rest of the team gets the update, they get the status, things flow like they should. Even getting into things like task and subtask, for a particular process, or approvals for a request, or change management approvals across multiple systems. How do you handle that? Though you start to get a bit more complex sometimes when you're staying inside the organization.
Yeah, two of the things we've helped solve, well, I guess three maybe solve for specifically, one of the things I can think of is ServiceNow, has this great referential library of things, right? So you have an incident, you've got a CI on it. There's attributes in the CI that tell you about where it is and how important it is and who's responsible for it. And that's just one of many examples. You mentioned approvals, right? Potentially related tasks. But then if I'm sending that data to like a Jira issue, I really only have one record to send it to, and I'm not going to have all the relational data kind of built out the way it is in ServiceNow. So that transform of data from, here's how it's laid out in different places in ServiceNow to collect the right attributes of related data, format them the right way, and stick them in one place so that the person's right information is a big challenge, right? And that's one I think you kind of mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. What is a single process on one system might be 2 or 3 processes on the other system.
Yep.
We're not even and as you mentioned, multiple tables, right? Multiple tables of data related to actually put together a process. So, yep, those are things we solve. Those are kind of the level of not only technical, but process challenges that we tend to focus on, again, in and out of ServiceNow to one or multiple systems. So it could be in your example, we're just going ServiceNow and Salesforce, or it could be we go Salesforce in from a customer, ServiceNow for the general IT. They've got to kick it to a development organization. They prefer to work in Jira or DevOps, or I love this example, multiple Jiras in one organization. That happens too.
Common.
So
yeah. Well, you let all these hero developer teams, right, who are building really cool stuff, and they're very technologically competent. So they're going to spin up the tool that works for them, and a lot of times you end up with kind of like fragmented technology, right?
Right. And instead of trying to force a consolidation, let's just integrate them and let them work in the system they already have. Right. We do that today for, a few different customers who need to connect. We do that for Paychex as an example I can mention with their ServiceNow to Jira. And we have other customers as well that for that use case, right, is to escalate to the team, let the team work in the tools they use, let them work in that environment that they are in every day. It makes everyone more efficient. And then when you have the controls in place of what's a required field, how are we going to map the statuses? To your point, one item in Jira may feed into two processes in ServiceNow. That's when things can really start to sing and those systems can start to work together in a very process-oriented way.
Yeah, the other thing that's really interesting about this is I think it's more common to have systems effectively daisy chained together across a process, right? You maybe have one system for managing recruiting, and then it feeds data into your people management system, right? And then that feeds data into ServiceNow, and then ServiceNow feeds data somewhere else. And you end up with, and you mentioned this earlier, I think, that there's kind of more data mapping complexity, or it's beyond data mapping when it's within an organization. So you got to worry about, obviously, what you mentioned, which system's going to be the source of truth for which data. But the other thing you got to worry about is downstream dependencies, right? So you might have to collect a lot more data inbound to ServiceNow, not necessarily because you need it all, but because the system you're going to be sending it to needs it.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. So you may collect fields from Jira that ServiceNow team doesn't use whatsoever, but the Salesforce team has to have it. Or vice versa. Maybe the entitlement to the customer that lives in Salesforce has to be visible through the change management process. So even though the middle system may not use the data, you get the data there so you could, sync it with others as needed. Yep.
Yeah, it's we've, as we've designed bunches of these in the past, it's always this thing where you work with folks and they kind of know, they've got the best understanding of the processes in either end, but sometimes oversimplify the complexity of just mapping all the pieces to make it seamless. And as you start to have some of these discussions, people really, both get excited and potentially a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of things to consider.
Yeah. And I'm sure, Josh, you've seen this where maybe initially a kind of a one-off solution worked, and then you've got another and another, but they were never really designed together as a holistic approach.
Yep.
And now you're just trying to keep these pieces together, but you're straining. Yep. You're straining at the ability of those initial, solutions.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and then the other part of this, right, is let's assume these are globally distributed systems, right? So we have to then be able to work globally. We have to be able to work, how do you want to handle different time zone issues, different language packs and different systems, if that's something to think about. How do you want to handle failure modes and reporting and visibility? Because, even though these are internal systems, they're still critically important. You have to know they're functioning. You have to trust the solution. And what's that troubleshooting methodology look like? Do I have to go wake up, a developer, or do I have a way I can do some initial troubleshooting in a centralized location? So again, a lot of the things we talked about earlier, even with security and encryption and so on, would come into play here, obfuscation, GDPR, and so on, because there might be PII data or other types of identifiable data that one team can see, but another team should not see. So those all come into play as well as how do I pass this across in a compliant way also?
Yep. Yeah. And that's something we're hearing about a lot now, right? We got, CCPA in California, we got GDPR obviously in the EU, and then there's versions of it in Canada and New York. So people are paying a lot more attention to it. I think it's coming, and having some visibility onto, being aware, right, that's something we have to be concerned about in advance is certainly forward looking, which is awesome.
Yeah, the days of just sending an entire table, I think, are kind of somewhat coming to an end. I can't just share everyone's data with everyone in the company anymore, like in the years past. So,
well, and part of the problem with that is like you can't deal with compliance just globally, right? You have to deal with it when in these integrated systems. You have to take that into account at every step, and that's a level of kind of detail that people. It's a transition, right? Because we're used to writing a policy and saying people go follow this, and then there's not as much management required at the individual system level, and now that's changing.
Yeah,
Very cool.
absolutely.
So there's a ton of complexity here. There's a lot to consider. It's something that we have experience helping customers with in the past, and Perspectium also has a bundled integration as a service solution to help solve some of these problems. But hope that this was interesting from things to consider perspective and use cases and whatnot. Maybe it got some of you guys thinking. If anybody has any additional questions, please put them in the chat. I think we addressed one or two as part of the some of the conversation. One of the ones that was mentioned is that first slide should probably be bidirectional. That is correct. So we will make that update. Perspectium is pushing and pulling data in and out of ServiceNow, and in the use cases customers are looking for, that's almost always the case. It's very rarely just a unidirectional push or pull. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, stick them in the chat now. And while we will let you guys go, we do want to continue the conversation. So on the screen, you'll find links for Cerna Solutions and Perspectium. Please check us out. Like, share, follow, all of those things we do today. And thank you for your time today.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure. And on the Perspectium information, feel free to check out our website. We do have an upcoming webinar next on March 3rd is our next one as well. So for any of you in the ServiceNow ecosystem, the ServiceNow Witch Doctor is joining us for that one.
Awesome. That's sounds very cool. We'll make sure to tune in.
Thanks, Josh.
All right. Thank you, guys.